Hello, Lions fans, and welcome to another edition of Believe in Lions. I'm Trevor Thompson, and so much to talk about on this week's edition of the show. Jack Campbell gets paid, OTAs are underway, and FanDuel has a couple of Lions up for postseason awards before the season even starts. And here to break it all down for us is a guy who knows his Lions inside out. He's been covering the team since 2010. He's four-time Michigan Sports Writer of the Year and one of the best beat writers in the business, the author of an illustrated timeline of the Detroit Lions. It's Dave Birkett joining the show here today. And Dave, really appreciate your time. So much to get to, as I say. But let's start with Jack Campbell getting paid. He's right up there in Fred Warner territory as far as the highest paid linebackers in the business. How big is this deal for the Lions?
Yeah, well worth it too. I mean, Jack Campbell's one of the best linebackers in the NFL, obviously, an all-pro last season, first team all-pro. Frankly, I thought he'd get a little bit more, that he would become the highest paid linebacker in the NFL, just based on the leverage that he had and kind of where he's at in his career. So good deal for the Lions to get him in a little bit under Fred Warner territory when it comes to the money. You know, the way the Lions structured the deal, of course, they pushed a lot of their cap commitments off into the future, and they're going to have to pay the bill for that at some point. But they do have this window to contend here, where they have Jack Campbell and Aiden Hutchinson and Jamison Williams and Penei Sewell and all these guys signed for pretty cheap, really core young players to the roster. So this is a time that they have to take advantage of it, and good step for this team and for what this season can be to get Jack Campbell under contract this year.
And he said he didn't need to be the highest played linebacker in the business, but he did want to be respected and recognized as an elite player. But he also said, Dave, and I thought it was interesting, that when he was taken 18th overall back in 2023, that he got a letter from a fan that said, worst pick in NFL history. And he's been motivated by those kinds of things, not to prove people wrong, but to prove those who believe in him right. What drives this guy from what you know about him, and how motivated is he to be an elite linebacker and to be one of the core pieces of this team?
Yeah, I think you go back to 2023, and really what attracted the Lions to him in the draft was just that he's a football player, right? Like your definition of football player, what you think it is, that, as Dan Campbell likes to say, the grit, the nastiness, the toughness, right? This is a guy that, he had a big hole in his cheek from taking a cleat to the mouth last year, and he missed like 8 snaps. He was on the sideline getting stitched up, and then he came right back in. I mean, he's the heart of the Lions defense. Aiden Hutchinson gets a lot of the headlines. You can't do anything without a great pass rusher. Aiden Hutchinson, is that, but Jack Campbell is really the heart of the defense, the guy that's never going to come off the field, and that sets a tone with his physical play. So, whatever the Lions are going to be able to accomplish on defense this fall, it's going to start with Jack Campbell in the middle of that unit.
How much is he going to miss, and how much will this team miss? Alex Anzalone, he was the captain of the defense last year. There's a big hole to fill there. Obviously, those guys played off one another. How big a hole is that going to be to fill? How much will Jack miss that guy and the team as a whole?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of an underrated loss for the Lions, and I get it. They paid Derek Barnes last year. They were going to pay Jack Campbell this spring, and that's happened now. It's really tough in the NFL to pay 3 linebackers, and they didn't want to spend on Alex Anzalone. But Anzalone was their best coverage linebacker. He's another guy that never came off the field. You saw what happened to that defense when he broke his forearm late in that 2024 season. Kind of how they fell apart in that unit, and when he came back, just the galvanizing effect that they had. So he's going to be missed. That's one of the big storylines this offseason, something I put in on freak.com. We did a little, 7 storylines to watch, for the rest of OTAs this week. And one of them was what the Lions do at that, not just number 3 linebacker position, but with the nickel, defense spot, right? A lot of teams play a slot cornerback there. Maybe it's a safety. The Lions led the league in snaps by 3 linebackers last season, base defensive snaps. And a lot of that was because of Alex Anzalone's ability to cover tight ends and even, stretch out on some slot receivers at times.
And the Lions were also known for having one of the best running back duos in the business. And now David Montgomery has moved on, going into OTAs. What are you going to be looking at that running back position behind Jahmyr Gibbs? So certainly we know that Isaiah Pacheco has a bit of a track record, but wasn't the same player after his injury with that broken leg in Kansas City. Now he's here. He's going to back up Jahmyr Gibbs, who's obviously one of the most talented offensive players in the game today. But what are you looking at as far as OTAs go, as far as how they're going to fill that role moving forward with Drew Petzing in his offense and how things will shake out? What are you looking for and seeing there?
Hey, I'm waiting for Gibbs to get his contract right. He's going to get a Jack Campbell type deal, and it's a matter of whether he or Bijan Robinson goes first, and then the next guy is probably going to get slightly more than whoever signs the first deal. So that's going to happen. That's it's probably a talk for another time. But you're right. It's going to be Jahmyr Gibbs. He's going to get the bulk of the work at running back like he did last year. Isaiah Pacheco, the new addition, he's going to fill sort of that David Montgomery role, be the clear cut number two, but his physical presence is something that should help this Lions offense. And Travis, to be honest, right, we're not going to see a whole lot of that here in spring because they're not in pads. So maybe the real, test of that or real, idea of how that's going to work is going to come in the summer when training camp starts. The one thing I will say about the running back room, and maybe something that will be interesting to watch this spring, is what happens to Sione Vaki. He's the number 3 back and hasn't played a whole lot of running back, has had a lot of injury problems, but I know the Lions are still high on him, not just for what he can do on special teams, but maybe for what he can be as a running back. And look, he barely played the position in college. He's been hurt a lot the first 2 years, hasn't got a lot of reps. So I think it's important for him to be healthy and be on the field and maybe get some work if he's going to play whatever small role he's going to have on offense this fall.
That is going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out and how these guys are used going forward. But you mentioned 2 guys right now. You mentioned Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. FanDuel has them number 1 and 2 in the odds for the Offensive Player of the Year. He's got Bijan Robinson as number 1, Jahmyr Gibbs is number 2, and that's ahead of guys like Jahmyr Chase, Puka Nacua, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, who won the award last year. What does that say about how this league views Jahmyr Gibbs and his abilities at this point in his career right now, and what everybody thinks about this guy as far as the Lions team is considered and his value to the squad?
Man, I set you right up for that, didn't I? I didn't even know that.
You sure did. Right on the platter there, guy. Right on a platter. Yeah. Appreciate that.
No, I mean, it really is. Like, you go back to when, that 2023 draft, and Jack talked about it in his press conference about, that fan that sent him that I think he called it a dream big book or something to that effect, right? And it was this analyst had all these draft grades, and it was Jahmyr Gibbs F, Jack Campbell F. Like, people didn't like those picks. And look, I was a little bit critical of them, not because of the player, because of the value, the positional value, and maybe what you were passing on there. And we'll see how all this plays out now that these guys are making big money. That's part of the calculus of that. But everybody loved Jahmyr Gibbs, and I think what he's become has really been the vision that the Lions had for him of being this all-purpose back, not just a receiver out of the backfield, not just a runner, not just a third down guy, but a guy that can get tough yards, a guy that can do a little bit of everything. He's had an amazing first 3 seasons, clearly one of the best running backs in the NFL. Whether he's one or you think Bijan is, or, I know there's a handful of other, really elite backs out there, guys that put up big rushing numbers. But he is such a key part of this Lions offense. And if they get that offensive line right, if they got that right this offseason, I think you're going to see Jahmyr Gibbs have an even better season in 2026 than he did the last 2 years.
I know you said later on in the summer when they get into training camp and guys are in pads, we'll know a lot more. But what can you tell right now, or what will you be looking for in OTAs as far as how Drew Petzing wants to set up this offense, how he'll use these guys right now, and how much can you really glean from where they're going at this point in the season?
Yeah, no, I think you can a little bit, and you have to be careful because, right, every OTA it's an install, right? So you're we get one a week, and you see different things in it, and it's not like a full snapshot of the offense, like when you're watching training camp for 15 straight days, and you kind of see everything evolve. So to me, I think what the important part is right now, the offense isn't going to be this complete overhaul, look different than it was last year, and you're probably not going to be able to tell a ton about the running game yet. But I want to see the pace that they play with. I want to see how quickly they get in and out of the huddle. I want to see how much motion they use. Just some of those things that maybe give you a tell into how modern an offense it is, right? And I don't think there's any doubts that it will be. And we've heard a little bit about Petzing's intelligence and his creativity, and I certainly expect him to bring some of those things to the Lions. But if they're out there getting in and out of the huddle super quick, it's probably the same terminology, and Jared Goff said it would be a lot of that they used in the past. And if they're using a lot of motions, I think that gives you some idea of maybe what you can see in the fall when games get going for real.
That's going to be interesting to see. Now, we've talked about Jack Campbell getting paid. You alluded to Jahmyr Gibbs going to get some money here shortly. Another guy who's due for a contract and has some question marks around him right now, Sam LaPorta. Big key component to this offense. The number of things you can do, the way that he offers a little more to the offense, and the creativity that they can implement with a guy like that when he's healthy. Now, coming off this back surgery, I don't know how much he's going to see the field in OTAs, and maybe you can give us some info on that. Maybe you've been enlightened as to where he stands right now in his recovery, but what's the future hold for this guy? What do you see there as far as not just the contract, but his health this season coming into OTAs?
Three big injury concerns for the Lions coming off last year. Sam LaPorta obviously had the back surgery. Kirby Joseph, who was out a whole lot of the year with a knee injury, and Brian Branch with the torn Achilles. And look, LaPorta after the season, LaPorta said he expected to be available during OTAs or out there running around during OTAs. I don't think the Lions will push him. I do look, if he gets on the field, there's nothing that he, when he gets on the field, I don't think there'll be anything that he can't do, right? I haven't heard any concerns about his rehab to the point that it's raised a red flag where maybe he's not going to be available for the start of the season. I think the Lions are counting on him to be there and to be an integral part of this offense. And like you alluded to, Trev, he's going to be another guy that probably gets a contract extension this offseason. As long as he comes back here, doesn't show any negative signs from that injury, and the Lions are confident that he can get back to being the top flight tight end that he was, the past 3 seasons. I think you'll see him get an extension here this summer as well.
Brock Wright is no Sam LaPorta. I know they brought in Ty Conklin maybe a little for depth purposes right there, but if Sam LaPorta is not able to go, what do they do with that position? It's obviously a key position in this offense. What do you see happening if he's not 100% or there's a setback along the way?
Yeah, and I think this was the one area that, when the Lions traded up and they didn't have the 3rd round pick, obviously, and they traded one of those 4s, that's a spot that maybe ideally they would have liked to have drafted a young tight end. LaPorta's in the last year of his contract. We think he's going to get a new one, but he's in the last year of his contract. Brock Wright's in the last year of his contract. Tyler Conklin signed a 1-year deal. So, as things stand right now, there's not a lot down the road there. And hey, you mentioned it. Look, like LaPorta he's going to get paid because he's a difference maker at that position. The way he can catch, the way he can stretch the field, the intent that he has when he blocks, even if he's not quite on the Brock Wright level as a blocker, like he can do all those things. And so when you don't have them, that's such an important part of your offense missing. I think if something were to happen, I think we see a lot more 31 personnel out of the Lions. Maybe that means a lot more Isaac Teslaa out on the field. Drew Petzing was a guy who over the last 3 years, his 3 years as a play caller in Arizona, he ran the most 2 tight end sets in the NFL. 2 and 3, I believe they were one of the top, teams in 3 tight end sets last year. And so maybe that's something the Lions do a little bit more of this year with the personnel that they have in that room, if they're healthy. Don't forget Brock Wright, who was a throat injury similar to what Frank Ragnow had a few years ago. He also missed the end of the season last year. So they were really thin at the tight end position.
What do you think the number looks like for Sam if he gets a deal done here?
Man,
given where he's at right now?
That's a good question.
Value to the team, like if he is healthy, like where do you go with that? What do you think?
I don't have the contract numbers for the top tight ends in front of me, so I don't know exactly what that is. But I would think he would be one of the highest paid tight ends in the NFL. Maybe coming off the injury and given where he's at, maybe you don't quite pass. I believe it's George Kittle is the top guy still at that position. But look, Sam's going to get paid. He's an important part of this offense. If the Lions can do it just like they did Jack Campbell's and make it where it's not market setting value, I think that helps the franchise going forward, maybe being able to spend around the edges because they have this nucleus in place.
Given the point of the season when Brian Branch went down with that Achilles, it's going to be later on when we see him, so we won't really get to him right now. But what can you tell us about Kerby Joseph and where he's at right now? This guy is so integral to what this defense does. He's so dangerous back there with those hands. Obviously, the highest paid safety in the game at the time that he signed his deal. Shows you the value that he has to this team and across the league. Where's he at right now? What do you see as far as recovery? Will he be the same player when he comes back, when he does recover? What do you see from this guy? It just because, like I said, very, very crucial to what this defense does with what he's able to do back there.
Yeah, that's a wild card, and I wish I had some specifics to give you on exactly where he's at in his rehab, what the future holds. I mean, I think this is something, I know this is something that he'll have to manage, for the rest of his career. Someone had asked me in a mailbag I did a few weeks back, just over under for games for Kerby Joseph for this fall, and I think they put the
Yeah.
number at 8.5 or 9.5 or something like
Ooh.
that. I took the over. I mean,
Okay. Okay. Well, that's
just
encouraging that you're
yeah,
taking the over.
just taking an optimistic view on it. I mean, look, I think
Right.
because it's a pain management issue and because he's went through it and because the Lions went through it last year, maybe everyone knows how to manage it a little bit better. And that's the important thing because, as you said, he's such a big part of this defense. I mean, that secondary and some of the issues that they had last year when you don't have Kerby Joseph, you don't have Brian Branch, two all pro type safeties, Kerby Joseph with the ground that he can cover, the instincts that he has going sideline to sideline, the range, Brian Branch with the playmaking ability that he has both in the box and outside the box. I think they missed those guys dearly last
Oh,
year. And I look,
tremendously.
even though I think Kerby will be back and will play more than whatever that over under number of games is, I can't lie and say I'm not concerned about it because I do. I think anytime
Right.
you miss that type of time and you have the type of condition that he has in his knee, I do think it's a concern. But I would be optimistic, like I said, that having gone through it, and I know Kirby's doing everything he can to get on the field, that maybe the Lions can manage his minutes, his reps during the week enough to get a big impact out of him again this fall.
I wish I had FanDuel numbers on what the over/under on games played for him would be, and we'd see whether we take the over/under on that. He's a crucial part of this defense, so let's hope that you're right, and he does play more than 9 games, and it has a full season. That would be very encouraging for these guys going forward. There's another guy, cornerback. I really got to see something out of Terrion Arnold this year. How big a season is this for this guy coming into this year? He has to stay healthy. He has to cut down on the penalties. He has to learn to be a difference maker. He just has to be. That's where they drafted him. It's
Yeah.
what he was drafted to be. How big a season is this for Terrion Arnold? And what are you looking at from him? Not just through OTAs and spring and training camp when it gets going, but throughout the season and his development, where he's at on the curve. What are
Yeah.
you looking for personally, and how important do you think he is? I think it's a crucial guy as far as going forward is what this defense needs right now.
Look, the biggest question on offense to me is still the offensive line, right? Because there's so many, moving parts. It's a little bit of a shell game, right? You had it one hole here, you plug it, you move someone over here, you create another one, you try to fill it, and so I'm still anxious to see what that is on the offensive side. On the defensive side, it's a secondary because of the injuries, because of what they went through at the cornerback position last year. I think there's a lot of questions still about Terrion Arnold, about what they do at that nickel spot, about the health they have at the safety, and look for Terrion. He's shown flashes. If you look at some of the analytical numbers, right? The tight window throws forced, and the catch average separation rate, things like that. Terrion actually fares pretty well in some of those numbers. So it's not like this guy's just getting burned down the field when he's having his issues. A lot of it is the playmaking, right? That hasn't been there. He has one interception in his 2 seasons, and I think it's safe to say when you draft a cornerback that high that you want a little bit more out of that position. Some of that, he's a rookie, he's getting used to it. He had the penalty problems early,
Mhm.
but I think for Terrion to take the next step, number one, he's got to be available and he's got to be on the field because that was an issue last year. We'll find out what this season holds a little bit more this summer. But number two, he's got to be the type of cornerback that can start making plays. He had
Yeah.
the one interception he had last year. I thought it was a really good pick. If I remember right, he was down on the ground, was sort of back on the back hip deflection, maybe. So he has that ability, but he's just got to turn that into production on the field.
It's got to be this year. This has to be the year for this guy. Looking forward. So that's something I'm looking forward to seeing play out on the defensive side of the ball. You talk about the O line. I want to talk about the defensive line as well. I'm going to give you this. FanDuel has Aiden Hutchinson at plus 1,100 for the Defensive Player of the Year. That's third behind Myles Garrett, who won the award last year, and Will Anderson of the Houston Texans. But how much of a competition is there going to be on the other edge side with DJ Wanham, who was brought in, and then Derek Moore, who was obviously drafted in the second round to help out and play opposite of Aiden as well. How much do you think that competition is going to play out? How interested are you seeing that play out in OTAs? And what do you think you're going to learn about that in OTAs and then going forward as far as that goes?
Yeah, and I'd throw Levi Onwuzurike in the mix there too. Obviously, everyone thinks of him
Yeah.
as a defensive tackle, but when you listen to the way that Dan Campbell describes, those guys and the way that he wants to use them, he can play that big end position, and depending on what package, what team they're playing, what they want to get accomplished, maybe he's the guy that's out there on first down because of his ability to set the edge. But look, DJ Wanham Campbell, I think everyone they looked at sort of his stats, and he's been a guy that's played more than 50% of the snaps in every season that he's played in the NFL. But they maybe looked at the production and they thought, he was more of a Marcus Davenport type, and Dan called him, a pass rush. I forget the terminology that he used, but he essentially talked about him as being a pass rush specialist type guy, and a guy that maybe has more edge rush ability than we've given him credit for. So I think the Lions see DJ Wanham as a guy that could maybe not fully, replicate the production of El Khadim Muhammad last year, but certainly put a dent into the 11 sacks that they lost. To me, he's probably your starter. He's the veteran. You spend a second round pick, obviously, on Derek Moore. You trade up for him. That's a guy that they like enough to spend some extra capital to go and get, and he's certainly going to be in the rotation. I think Aiden Hutchinson, and then some combination of those guys on the other edge. Sub packages, one of those guys moves inside. Maybe it's Wanham playing from the inside and more rushing on the edge, and all of a sudden, at least you have a little more depth at that position than you did in the past. I still don't know if the Lions have enough pass rush. Right, I still am a little bit concerned about what they can get in the interior of the line. Big question to me is whether Aleem McNeil, how healthy is he going to be? He didn't quite look like himself when he came back from that ACL, but another year of recovery time or another 6 months of recovery time, and maybe you get the Aleem McNeil that you had in the past. And if he's right, all of a sudden this defensive line becomes really good again.
I want you to expand a little more on your thoughts on the O-line, too. They draft Blake Miller. They bring in Cade Mays. Juice Scruggs comes back in that deal for David Montgomery. Not sure how he's going to be used, but a brand new offensive line. We know how crucial it was, and we saw the difference last year when Frank wasn't there and just the changes on the line. It really was a setback for this team. What are you looking for in OTAs, or how are they going to bring this chemistry around with this time in OTAs and throughout training camp to really get that?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. Look,
and really get this thing going back on track where they were. What are your thoughts?
Some of the same faces on the offensive line, right? Penei Sewell, but he's moving from right to left tackle. Tate Ratledge should be in place at right guard. I think Christian Mahogany probably opens as the incumbent, right, as your starter at left guard. But, when I talked about it being sort of a shell game, to me, the biggest issue obviously was some of the continuity up front last year, but the center position, right? And now you bring in Cade Mays to play center, a guy who's should be an upgrade, but he doesn't have a ton of experience at that position. You get rid of Taylor Decker at left tackle. Well, Penei Sewell should be fine at left tackle, but maybe there's a little bit of a learning curve there. And then you got a new right tackle. So really, is it a downgrade from Decker to Blake Miller? Yeah, if we're being honest, it probably is. Your right guard should be a little bit better this year. Your center, probably a little bit better, but I don't know that it was totally Graham Glasgow's fault, some of the things that were going on last year. So there's a lot to sort out at those positions. Dan this offseason emphasized depth, emphasized competition. I think that's what you see on the offensive line. You sign a Ben Barch, a veteran who's got some starting experience that can maybe compete for that left guard spot. Juice Scruggs, he's probably your backup center, right? He's probably your backup guard, but he has that position versatility. So I do think they're a little bit deeper on the offensive line in terms of having answers, but I don't know that any of the answers that they have currently are better than what they had last year. And that, as much as we'll see right now, I think that's another thing that we probably won't get a sense of until the pads come on later this year.
What else are you looking for through OTAs? What do you got your eye on specifically other than the things we've touched on already?
Yeah, well, obviously the injuries are the big one. I want to see, Joseph and Branch and LaPorta, even just working on the side. Sometimes when those guys are out there working publicly, that's maybe maybe it's just part of the rehab and what they're doing, but it's also telling that they're willing to put themselves out in front of reporters that are out there doing it. So
Right, right.
that's one thing. Isaac Tesla's a name that I know we haven't talked a whole lot about, and look, he's in the pecking order of the offense, right? It's still Jahmyr Gibbs and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison and Sam LaPorta, and then you get to Teslaa fifth. So I don't know what sort of role he's going to have, but he showed some flashes last year too.
Yeah,
Obviously,
he did.
he had
Very
made
impressive.
a lot of wow plays, and so I'd like to see a little bit of growth out of him, so that you feel confident that if one of those top offensive options goes down, you feel really good about who you're bringing in at that number 3 receiver spot, but whatever role he fills on offense. So those are a couple of the big things for me. And then Trev, just back to the whole thing that we talked about with Jack Campbell and losing Alex Anzalone. Malcolm Rodriguez is probably the number 3 linebacker right now, and he's not too long removed from his ACL injury. They don't have a ton of depth at that position, so they do need a big offseason, big summer from Malcolm Rodriguez to make sure that position is locked down on defense.
Jimmy Rolder going to be able to offer anything there as a rookie?
We'll see. Obviously he played pretty good at Michigan last year. It was really his only year of contributing. He had some injuries early in his career. I think, what I think they need most is a guy that can cover on third downs like Anzalone did, so they can still play some of that base defense and some of those, passing situations. So I don't know if he's going to be ready to do that as a rookie, but I do think he'll be able to contribute as on special teams and as a situational player on defense.
So much to look forward to. So many questions that need to be answered. And Dave, we appreciate your insights trying to answer some of those questions here on this edition of Believe in Lions, brought to you by FanDuel. Any other thoughts you want to leave the fans with before we cut the show?
No, this is always a look. I know people start to get into OTAs and minicamp, and they want to get a sense of where their team is headed. But as Dan Campbell always says, right, this is sort of the pajama party. The real thing comes, later on when pads come on. So, everything that you see from my observations, from everything that you hear coming out of players being in the best shapes of their lives, and all the storylines that come up every spring. Take it with a grain of salt. Let's wait till the pads come on, and we're in the middle of August, and we'll have a much better sense of how this team looks and how capable they'll be of contending. And Trev, I will say, that schedule came out. Obviously, I know you've talked about it and seen it, but really tough end. But the way this thing sets up, there's a shot for the Lions to get on a roll early. They got some very, very winnable games in that first 5 before the bye. If they start hot, I don't think there's any reason why they can't win the NFC North again.
Oh, that would be music to the ears of Lions fans out there. From your lips to God's ears, let it be so, Dave. Appreciate your time on this edition of Believe in Lions, Dave, and everybody out there. Be sure to like, be sure to subscribe, be sure to enjoy, and be sure to read Dave Birkett's work in the Detroit Free Press going forward. Dave, appreciate your time. Thanks, guy.
You got it, Trevor. We'll see you.